Okay. Welcome everyone to tonight's session 13, covering the business and finance of medicine with Dr. Angela Gardner. If you have any questions regarding our program, please contact us at Virtual Shadowing on Instagram, or please email us at virtualshadowing@gmail.com. Dr. Gardner, if you could go to the next slide. Here are some upcoming sessions that we have. We will have a DO physician next week, Dr. Beeson. We have a healthcare advisor the following week to talk about how you can communicate with your local healthcare provider or healthcare advisor. We have Dr. Luna, who's a rural medicine physician and also Texas Medical Board member. And after that, we have Dr. Salazar talking about AI and innovation in medicine. Be sure to join us those weeks. Next slide. And here's our working group. We are made of a couple pre-meds, Reagan, Shayon, Taylor, Alana, me, Rachel, Aniruth, Miriam, and we have Dr. Fowler and Dr. Morchetti. If you have any questions during the session, please put it in the chat as we go along. Our working group will take all the questions and we will hopefully get to them during our 2 designated Q&A sessions. We will have one in the middle and one at the end. And if you have any questions regarding the quiz/assessment, we will discuss that at the very end. So please hold off all questions till the end. Dr. Fowler?
Angela, there we are. Welcome, everybody. It's so nice to have you back for our 13th session. This is now entering our 4th month of doing this. It's good to have you. We have over 17,000 people that have signed up for the website, and it's an absolute honor for the whole working group to be part of this. It's a pleasure. We've really enjoyed you. We've raised $3,000 on GoFundMe to cover the cost, so you've been really helpful for that. This is a tough time for Texas. We have a hurricane headed our way. We may be putting together a response group. And so I may be posting something on the website trying to raise some volunteers in case we have a massive sheltering operation. Look at the website, please, in the next day or so. And Rachel and Reagan will be coordinating that. Tonight, it is my pleasure to welcome one of my closest friends and someone who is one of the finest physicians that I've ever worked with. And when I say finest physicians, this is someone who is ruthlessly committed to the care of human beings. And when I work alongside her in the emergency department, I am always just so edified by the quality of her care and her dedication to doing the right thing. Angela Gardner is a remarkable person. She is professor and vice chair of administrative affairs and the chief of operations, quality, and patient safety for the Department of Emergency Medicine at the University of Texas Southwestern, where Dr. Morchetti and I work with her as co-faculty. Of the 76 specialties of medicine, Dr. Gardner has stood at the top. She was the president of the American College of Emergency Physicians, the National Specialty Society for Emergency Medicine, from 2009 to 2010. In that capacity, she was involved in the formation of the Affordable Care Act, earning her the distinction of being named number 83 of the list of the top 100 most influential people in healthcare by Modern Healthcare in 2010. She received the Wittgenstein Award in 2015, which is the highest honor in the specialty of emergency medicine presented by the American College. She was also a recipient of the Hayes Award for outstanding contribution to the field of emergency medicine and the Texas Tech Emergency Medicine Outstanding Alumni Award. She's done so much. She was on the board of the National Trauma Institute for 8 years, including 4 years on the science committee. She has stood in many leadership roles, including on the American College of Emergency Physicians Board of Directors for 10 years. The list goes on, but one of the most important things for us as practitioners of medicine in the state of Texas is that Angela was instrumental in achieving tort reform, which helps protect physicians against litigation, against lawsuits in the state of Texas, for which she received a commendation from the legislature of the state of Texas. Angela is a remarkable woman. She's one of my closest friends. I love her so much. I played the piano at her wedding. I ran everybody out. No, just kidding. Angela, I'm so deeply pleased to have you here on behalf of the working group and what is it, 13 or 1400 of our closest friends. Welcome to Virtual Chatter.
Thank you. Thank you, Ray. I was looking at my keyboard trying to find a key to adjust the screen because my head is getting bigger every minute. Thanks for that kind introduction. So thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here. I also was interested to find out this is a business talk on the 13th. If only it were Friday, it would be perfect. So just one comment before we move on in the slides. I know that those of you that are looking at the photo of me are going, what happened? And well, this is what COVID has done to me, a virtual background, and now my hair is gray. So you'll just have to forgive me for that.
Well, I have COVID hair also, Angela. So, you know,
there you
I'm
go.
almost to a ponytail now. So
there you go. So our topic tonight is to talk about business and medicine. And those two things are not different things. And the main point I want to make to you tonight is that everyone in this chat room, everyone on this event wants to go into medicine because they want to help people. That's the common denominator that we all hold. What's not apparent when you're sitting in your shoes is the fact that medicine really is a business. And I don't just mean the practices that are out there, the hospitals, the reimbursement strategies, although that's an important part of what you will do someday, that medicine truly is a business, and that business will be you. And so today is the day that you realize that you're an entrepreneur. Now, I don't want to scare you to death. Dr. Morchetti said that I scared him to death when he was a resident. So I want to reserve scaring people for the residents. And for you guys, I'd just like for you to open your eyes a little bit and realize who you are and think a little bit about the choices that you're making and how they affect your career. So today, you become an entrepreneur and you are going to build the business that is you. And this is the most important thing that I could bring home to you tonight. One of the places that you guys are already marketing that you may not be aware of is on social media. Now, I hear people refer to social media sort of broadly, and you may not realize that that applies to everything you do that lands on the internet because it lasts forever. And thank goodness, Dr. Fowler and I did not have to deal with that when we were in your shoes. The things we did might be captured on a Polaroid that someone would keep or not. And the only person with baby pictures would be your mother, and they'd have to get to her to find them. Unfortunately for you guys, everything you do is imprinted on the internet. And so everything you imprint on the internet needs to be something that you would be willing to have published in a newspaper or put on a business card. If it's not of that quality, then you should take steps to have it not appear in the internet. So I'm not suggesting anything shady. I'm just saying that 50 pictures that come up of you in a bar on spring break probably are not your best marketing feature. Well, depending on what you want to market, but if you want to go to medical school, it's probably not your best thing. So something to be aware of. Also be aware that when you do get into medical school and when you pursue your career, the things you do and say will also be preserved forever and may or may not come back to haunt you. Dr. Fowler was talking about the time that I was involved in the formation of a new form of healthcare for the country. And there were score sheets out there that said, they would have my name, it would say Dr. Gardner, and it would say pro con, and it would tell you all the positive things I had said about something, all the negative things I had said about something, and there were score sheets. And I would look at those things and get my feelings hurt. But honestly, it was fair. Those were things I said, and those things have weight and meaning. So even now, if you're not in the public eye, there is a score sheet going on somewhere in someone's mind. So just be aware of that and aim for those positive associations if you can. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about building your business. If you were going to build any other type of business, you would bring in an expertise or a product, and then you would sell that product. You're doing the same thing now as you go to college, as you start medical school. You are inputting knowledge into the business, which is you. And then you have to sell that knowledge base. So if you've gone to college, you have to convince an admissions committee that you would be a good candidate to be a doctor. And it's great to have an inspiring story. Everybody has one. It's great that you want to help people, because that's sort of a given we've talked about. The rest of your selling, the rest of your advertising, if you will, has to do with choices that you're making right now. So those choices involve your choice of a college, or your choice of medical school, or your choice of any other academic pursuit that you have. So pursuing academic titles, if you will, is just the same as buying an ad campaign. You can spend $1 million on an ad campaign, or you can have a grassroots ad campaign. Neither one of those are wrong. Just realize what you're doing. And those choices will add up to your brand. So here's a caveat before we go on about believing your own PR. So remember that I told you that the sum of your experiences on the internet could be recited back to you. And that's true, positive and negative. So you need to believe in yourself. You really have done the things that are in the positive column. But remember that you always have room for improvement. So in spite of Dr. Fowler's glowing introduction of me, that's not the whole total of myself. I've also had some pretty embarrassing failures. And I will tell you about some of those as we go along. So if I just believed all the hype that I'm all that, then I might not either, one, be motivated to go on further, or two, I might actually have such a big head that I can't listen to feedback from other people. So I want to take that in. So with all that being said, the next thing you have to worry about in marketing your campaign or your business is your personal finances. Because if you're not solvent, your business is not solvent. And you want to put yourself in the best position possible to have the life that you want to have. So we're going to talk about 4 things. We're going to talk about buying a house. We're going to talk about debt. We're going to talk about marriage. And we're going to talk about borrowing. So let's first talk about, let me go back for a second. Let's first talk, and I'm going to move the little column over here. Let's first talk about buying a house. So when I talk to the residents in emergency medicine about the business of medicine, I always get into this personal part because it's important. And the first thing I tell them is don't buy a house. And they all kind of look at me like, what? Because this sort of natural thing happens. You finish medical school in your mid to late 20s, you fall in love, you get married, you go to a residency, and the next step is you buy a house, right? That's the American dream. That's how it's supposed to be. I'm here to tell you that isn't how it's supposed to be. And you need to resist that urge if at all possible. So I give this talk 3 times during the course of someone's residency. And the very last one, I tell them, don't buy a house your first year out of a wholly different reason. For emergency physicians, 80% of them will change jobs within a year, 1 year. So if they buy a house, they're going to lose. And I'm going to show you how that happens, or I thought I was going to show you how that happens. There we go. So, when we were talking about this talk, Dr. Fowler said, well, gosh, the rates are at 2.25%. Isn't that a great time to buy a house? No, it's not a great time to buy a house unless you're out of debt. You will have to own a home for 4 years. Otherwise, you will lose money when you sell that house. And that's just in today's dollars. And I have a little bit of mathematics to show you here. So if you have to borrow $400,000, and I think that's on my next slide here. This is about debt. We're going to talk about how to get out of debt, how to avoid getting into it, and debt ratios here in just a minute. And I don't know why I missed a slide somewhere. I wanted to talk to you about the cost of buying a house. So if you have to borrow $400,000, let's say, to buy a house, I put that on an amortization table, and you will have to end up paying back $863,000 to repay that amount. Now, let's say you bought a less expensive home. You say, okay, I won't buy an expensive home. I'll buy a $250,000 home. If you buy a $250,000 home and you finance it and you keep it for 4 years, it will cost you the original amount of the loan, the $250,000. It will cost you 1.5% in closing cost to add to that. It will cost you the cost of moving. So we allow about $2,000 or $3,000 for people to move. Plus you have to put deposits down on things. And then you have to buy furniture to go in that house unless you want to sleep on the futon the rest of your life. And then when you sell that house, it will cost you another 3%. So that's where we come up with, you would need to keep that home for 4 years in order to break even. And that's assuming that your house appreciates at a rate of 2%. So in 2008, unfortunately, a lot of people assumed that their houses were going to appreciate, and they didn't. And that's part of what caused the burst in the housing bubble. So keep that in mind at your next move, that you may want to refrain from buying a house. So let's talk about debt for a minute. How do you get out of debt? There are a lot of advertisements for people to help you out of debt. And I want to codify for you that this is about non-school related debt. We'll talk about school related debt in a minute. How do you get out of debt? Well, one, you have to do number two. You have to stop getting into so much debt, which means you have to live within your means. Now, here's where doctors get in trouble. And unfortunately, there are a large number of doctors out there who think they have to support a quote doctor's lifestyle. So they go out and they buy the biggest house they can buy. They buy 4 cars. They buy expensive furniture and hire designers to put in their houses for them. And I am not dissing all of their choices. Certainly personal choices are up to you. But if you're not bringing in the money that you can pay for that immediately, then you need to be living differently than you do. So I tried my best to live by that motto, and I lived in a regular 3-bedroom, 1,900 square foot house in suburbia for many, many, many years while my friends were buying McMansions, because I wanted to be out of debt and worked really, really hard to do that. Why did I want to do that? Why do I want to be out of debt? Because you never know when things change. I have friends now in Dallas who have suddenly had their work cut by 30% that are seriously troubled by the finances that they have inherited. So you can start this habit early. One of the things that I have recommended to people is your first couple of years out in practice, that you actually live on your resident salary. And if you can do that and not expand because you've delayed gratification so long, then you can keep from getting into so much debt. So that when you go to look for a house, your debt ratio won't come back to haunt you. So what's a debt ratio? A debt ratio is the amount of money that you're making versus the amount of money that you owe. And lenders look for a certain debt ratio in order to tell if you're going to be a good bet to buy that house. So you want to aim to get your debt under 20% of your income. So, and unfortunately for doctors, your student loan debt actually counts as part of that debt ratio. So that's something to be aware of. And then let's talk for a minute about credit scores. Dr. Fowler and I were laughing about our credit scores because they're not great credit scores. And that's something I'm very, very proud of. In order to have a credit score, you have to have debt. So you have to have some form of payment that you are making monthly that they can record. So certainly if you have something bad in your history, if you actually had a bankruptcy, if you had a repossession of a car or any other item, if you fail to pay something off, or if you have a bunch of late payments, those are certainly very, very bad things. But almost as bad for you is not having any debt. And if you think about that, that is a silly system, right? They don't count, credit scores do not count the money you have in the bank. They do not count what you're going to make. They do not count any of your assets. A credit score looks at all of the revolving debt you have. So somewhere earlier in my career, I took the advice from a mentor who told me to only have one credit card. I don't advocate one credit card over the other, but this particular credit card makes you pay it off every month. So you cannot accumulate debt. Because of that, that credit card doesn't show up in a credit score. Only revolving credit will show up in a credit score. I made a vow to myself. I bought one car and paid payments on it, and I made a vow to myself never to do that again. So I drove a Prius for a number of years for several reasons. One of them is it gets 50 miles to the gallon, and I bought it outright while I had 3 kids in college. So that was my rationale for that. So I don't want to have a car payment. So those don't show up on my credit score either. I now have a much nicer car. My kids are all grown, yay. And I have a much nicer car that I also paid cash for. So I recommend you have a hard look now at the life you want to have and delay your gratification just a little bit longer. And then let's talk about marriage. So everybody knows the shocking statistic that 50% of marriages will end in divorce. What most people never consider is the impact of that on your business, on your finances. Sorry, I need a drink of water there. So yesterday we were looking at the math on this, and if at the current rate, if all the students on this call were married, 4.5 of them would be divorced next year. And that actually is not terrible from a financial sense, except that the next year it would be 4.5 more and 4.5 more and 4.5 more. The good news is you see on the graph right in front of you what's happening to divorce rates in the United States. So it starts in the early 90s at a rate almost 5 per thousand, and now has fallen to almost 3 per thousand over a couple of decades. Why? That's the subject for a whole other lecture. But the good news is the falling divorce rate means there's a greater chance you'll stay married, and that's what you want to do to increase your financial solvency. The hard truth is when you get divorced, your assets are cut in half. They truly are. A judge will, they don't care who's right or wrong. And I know there's lots of movies out there that sensationalize this, but truly, divorce is a splitting of the assets in half, and you will keep half and your partner will keep half. But that sets you back 5 to 10 years, depending on how long you've been married, in accumulating the kind of wealth that you want to have.
So Angela, this is Ray. Why are we talking to kids at such a young age about avoiding divorce? Excuse me, we both got a frog in our throats. Why have this fatherly, motherly conversation with this 1,300 people that are online about avoiding divorce so young? Is that something they should be even thinking about?
It is something you should be thinking about. Average age of marriage in the United States is 25, 26. It's going up, I understand that, but the choices you make are really, really important ones. And I wouldn't want to guide you from a ethical, moral, or social place. I mean, that's the role of your parents and your religious leaders. But from a financial place, marriage and divorce is a serious business. And when you're talking about halving your assets, that's an important thing.
Okay.
So Dr. Fowler also asked me yesterday about divorce rates, and I showed him this nice graph, which is what's happened to divorce rates over time. And it shows a divide in the growing divorce rate. So I'm sorry, in the divorce rate. And what it shows is that since the mid 1970s, there's been a gap that's increasing between people who are educated and people who are not as educated in terms of divorce, so that your likelihood of being divorced actually goes down the more educated you are. That's good news for those of you that want to be doctors. It's also good news that the overall rates are going down. Now, if we looked at this graph all the way back to 1950 and even 1920, 100 years ago, we would find that the graph has gone like this before it went like this. Why is that? That, again, subject for a whole other lecture, but in 1920, divorce was relatively rare. Based on data from that time, it was at about 0.9 per thousand. In the 1950s, which some people hold up as an ideal time, I personally don't. In the 1950s, divorce was much more common than it was in the 20s, but not as common as it would be in the 70s. Why is that?
Well, it was the baby boom generation. The population of the United States was growing very substantially. The economy was improving.
Exactly.
There was very little to watch on TV.
That's true. The country had survived a war, and there was a shift in the population dynamics, such that a huge percentage of the male population that were over the age of 20 had died in the war. And so marriage for about 20 years had a boom. So from 45 to about 65, marriage was a highly valued commodity. And that does coincide with the baby boom, by the way, which goes along with that sort of traditional format. Then what happened? Well, there are a variety of opinions on that. One of them is that the birth control pill was invented. And with the invention of birth control for women, women were more able to control their financial future and their professional future. So in the early 1950s, a woman could be fired from her job for becoming married. So there were a number of professions that women were not encouraged to take, and there were a number of professions that women were prohibited from taking. But women were actually fireable by law if they got married. And that affected the economic future of a number of couples. When the pill was introduced in the 60s and women were able to control the rate at which they had children, things began to change socially and legally, so that by the mid 1970s, most of those laws had changed. Now, I have to tell you that in the state where I grew up, until 1978, a woman could not own property without her husband's permission, and she could not buy a car without her husband's permission. And that changed in 1978, which was the year I graduated from high school. So it's kind of shocking to me that that existed. Unfortunately, part of the fallout from all of this was when women became more independent and were able to support themselves, many of them said no to the spouses they had chosen. And then divorce law evolved to follow that. And now we have the situation where assets are split when people divorce. So, not to belabor the subject, but it's just bad business to get divorced. And now I think this brings us to our first question time.
Okay, so one of our top questions is it safe for me to borrow money for medical school or PA school?
Interesting you should say that. We're going to cover that topic in just a few minutes. And the answer is, it depends.
Okay. What qualifies as a brand?
That's a great question. A brand is something that people remember you by. So some of the ones that come to mind, top of mind, are if you live in our part of the country and you want a soft drink, you say, hey, let's go get a Coke. That's a brand because they apply that to all soft drinks. Kleenex is a brand, and I'm only quoting the successful ones, right? Kleenex is a brand. It's a brand name for a tissue, right? And those are two, sort of big examples of what a brand is. People have all kinds of brands. Some they have chosen and some they haven't. So I've spent my entire lifetime with bright red hair. For the first part of my lifetime, that was a natural thing. For the second half, it wasn't. And now that's a brand that I have to change. Mm-hmm. So that photo that you saw at the beginning of this talk is a PR photo. Every one of you needs one of those. You need one picture that you like that is shoulders up, from here up, that looks good, is well lit, is straight on to the camera, no quirky poses, and smiling or not smiling, but looking approachable. Every one of you needs one of those because that photo is your brand. That photo, if you look, should be on everything that you do. It should be your picture on Twitter. It should be your photo every time you give a presentation. It should be the photo you use when you apply to anything. It should be the first photo people see anytime your name comes up. That is branding. And if you'll take a look around, you'll see that movie stars obviously hire people to do that for them. But you'll see that politicians do that as well. And a lot of people do that you don't think of. Your professors, your even doctors, if you start looking through doctor pages, doctors will do that. That's part of your brand.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Our next question is, can doctors marry doctors and still have a family life?
Yes. Well, the answer is yes. I think it's one of those things you have to craft for yourself. And it takes a lot of negotiation and understanding and a lot of adaptability. And as in most things, any type of career that you have, when you get married, you have to sort of negotiate who's going to do what. There's no question that it takes 2 X chromosomes to have a baby, but everything else is up for grabs. So taking care of that baby, buying groceries, taking out the trash, driving, homeschooling, all of those things can be done by either gender. And it's up to 2 people to sort of decide how that goes. I've seen some very, very successful examples, and I've seen some not very successful examples. The not successful ones generally involve more of a focus of each individual on their careers and less of a focus on the joint family product that people are making.
Gotcha. So from a financial standpoint, when would you recommend getting married?
So I'm not being trite, but you need to get married. There's only one reason this is my personal belief. There's only one reason to get married. And that is when you cannot stand the thought of waking up another morning without that person at your side.
Absolutely.
That's the time you need to get married. And it is very much a business decision and financial decision, but it is also a very emotional decision. And it's not one that you should make just because you're turning 25 and it's time. So if you read a history of marriage, and I'm not a marriage counselor by any means, but if you read histories of marriages, there are times in people's lives when they're more likely to get married. And those have to do with times of transition. So when my parents were of marriageable age, that was 18, 19, 20. When you graduate from high school, right? When I was younger, when Ray and I were younger, the times were around 22, 23, 24, when you graduated from college and you were transitioning to the real world, lots of our friends got married. We see lots of residents get married as they face getting out into the real world. So there's not one time that's perfect.
Angela, we've had a question. As a woman, how hard is it to have a baby right after or during medical school from a financial point of view?
Oh, that's a great question. So times have changed a lot. I would not have been capable. So I went to medical school at 20 and I was immature and stupid. There is no way that I could have had a baby in medical school because I would not have been able to handle that. I had friends that did and finished on time and did great. Now, with the changes that are happening in the laws, all of that time is protected. The thing you have to remember about having a baby in medical school is that you're paying to go to school instead of being paid as an employed person. So you have to take into account what that will do to your study time and how it will lengthen your studies. And all it will do is delay. Now, if you have a baby in residency, there are new laws that say, and new ACGME regulations that say that there should be no penalty for having a child in the middle of residency. So I look for things to be changing there as well. I can tell you what happened to me personally. So well, maybe that's a little too personal, but I had planned to get pregnant during my first year out in practice, and I thought that was a smart decision. So based on the advice of my OB-GYN, we began trying before I got out of residency. So when I graduated, I was 5 months pregnant. What I didn't realize is, so I was initially an independent contractor. Most ER docs were at that point. And so I was given the time off. I delivered in a little bit early, actually, in December. And my partners were not happy because I got Christmas off and I was the low man on the totem pole. So I was supposed to be working that Christmas. And they accused me of doing it on purpose. But what happened was they gave me 3 months off. I really couldn't take that because I had only been out of residency for 6 months. And what did I do? The thing I told you guys not to do, buy a house. So I had a house payment. And yes, my husband was working, but we had a house payment. Now we had a new baby. And I stayed out of work a total of 3.5 weeks. That was a combination of needing to go back to work to make money because nobody paid me to be off. And the fact that my partners were upset that it was Christmas and I was getting all this time off. So I'm a living example of what not to do. The answer being, you got to look at your situation and see what it means for you.
Angela, we had an interesting question. Do you think patients prefer physicians with white sounding names or more ethnic names, or does it matter?
I'm not sure that it matters. I think what does matter is somewhat length matters. And I want to qualify that because it's culturally specific, right? So an unfamiliar name in any given location will be a little bit more difficult for people to say. So if you read any of the literature on the presidents that we elect, there's a certain rhythm, which is a pentameter that their names fit. Try it yourself. Check it out. Abraham Lincoln. See how that goes?
Abraham Lincoln. That's pentameter. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's a certain rhythm to names more than a length, I think, or an ethnicity.
We had a question about med bikini. I don't know if Reagan already answered this. 3 physicians have talked about women being unprofessional compared to men due to women having bikini pictures online. You talked about the online thing first, that there's now, when you and I were kids, the information just, pathway was not there, but now you can put anything out there. Angela, today I had sent a resume in of a candidate for a job. And the reviewer did a background check and found all this stuff out on Twitter, including F-bomb words and that kind of stuff as part of a background review. Should that weigh into the consideration by people hiring for a candidate?
Should it or does it?
That's a good question.
It does matter. And
Yeah.
I've participated in some panels where we talked about the ethics of looking at people's background material. And I would say that 10 years ago, people considered it a little below the belt to go look at someone's social profile. But now what is out there is considered fair game. So I don't want to downplay the courage of the women who have put pictures of themselves out there in bikinis on purpose. That takes a lot of courage. But what I would say is that you need to carefully curate what's out there. There are functions on all of your programs that allow you to accept or reject things to your timeline or to your feed. And when things are not flattering, you need to get rid of those. So I don't want to promote a culture of vanity either. And I'm not saying that you should say, oh my gosh, my hair's out of place. Or to say that you don't do things that are human. But I think you should try to promote the things that are as positive as possible.
So you mean the social media stuff actually ends up being at least part of your brand? Are you saying that?
I am. It does. It is part of your brand. I mean, if you stepped into the shoes of a movie star, you would never let someone publish something of you that was unflattering on purpose, because you know that that hype is part of your brand. So doctors are really not any different. We are in the public eye. The public expects a certain product. And now I'm going to really show my prejudices, and I would tell you to keep it confidential, but it won't be. Look around you. Look at the people who become plastic surgeons and the people who become dermatologists. Those are beautiful people. And that is not an accident. Those qualities will help them in their practice when they get out. And I think most of them at least acknowledge that.
I will say, just to wrap this thing up on social media, I do go out on Facebook. I mostly track people I grew up with and a few others, probably a couple hundred people. I'm really careful about what I put out there. I don't criticize anybody. I won't even, if I disagree with a politician, I won't even put that out there. I just think it's really important that it's certainly okay to think the things you think, but about this brand thing, that you've got to protect yourself, and you just sort of never know. I know that, for example, on the admissions committee, we look all the way back to high school, folks. We look all the way back. If you have a DUI, you may not get in professional school. For God's sake, don't get behind the wheel of a car if you've had a drink. Don't do it. I mean, you probably won't have a problem until you do. And then when you do, it'll track you for the rest of your life. So you have to be careful with who you are. Angela, let's turn a corner and move on to, you had said things about failure. I ended up where I went back home to practice emergency medicine. Many on the call know this. Back 40 years ago, and I ended up in emergency medicine because I failed 2 exams. I challenged a master's exam in immunology and in biochemistry, and I failed them both. If I had passed them, even if I'd passed one of them, I would have been a very different career. You've had some roadblocks you run up against, and how has that steered your life, would you say?
Well, so I'm trying to think of a way to say this that is encouraging. So I went to medical school early. I wasn't, and I'll be frank with this group, I wasn't really sure what medicine involved, but I knew I wanted to be a doctor. And like a lot of people, I chose medicine because I wanted to help people, and I was a smart girl. And this is what you did if you were smart, right? Because growing up in rural Mississippi, you don't have a lot of role models in front of you for being a successful, smart woman. And so I got into medical school. I went early. I didn't graduate from college, although I proudly have my Texas A&M mask. And then in my second year, I crashed into the wall full speed. So I failed a class, and you could not go on to, only one, but you could not go on to your clinical years until you passed that class. So I actually went to see the counselors about, what was wrong. Why was I not doing this? And I discovered that I actually didn't like my colleagues very much, and I didn't like medicine very much. And I remember a particular conversation where the counselor said to me, talking to me about my social life, and asked me about the people I had known in pre-med. And I said, well, I didn't hang out with any of those people. And the counselor said, why not? And I said, well, because, they're all mean, and they're all gunning and ambitious, and they're all nerds. And the counselor just looked at me and said, and who did you think was going to medical school? And I had a aha moment. Oh my God. So it's okay to be nerdy, and it's okay to let people know that you study, and it's okay to admit that you work at something. And it was a corner that I turned at that point. And I said, okay, well, from here on, I'm going to be more studious and admit to people that I can't go to happy hour, that I've got to go study for something. And it really, really made a difference to me. Luckily, I was able to hold on until I got to the clinicals. And then once I started taking care of patients, it was all over. But with the other counselor, I could just as easily have quit medical school at that point.
Angela, you're one of the smartest people I've ever known. Your ability to focus. I mean, we've had how many hours of conversations between us? What do you think happened to where you had the bump in the road? Was it a focus problem? Were you distracted by something? Was it a man? I mean, was there something in your life that got in the way? I remember my first.
It might have been the year I got married. It was the year I got married.
Yeah. We certainly see this on the admissions committee. People, excuse me, for example, they'll have an illness, and it'll affect their grades for a while, or there'll be an illness or a problem in the family. And we understand that what we're looking at is the overall trend. If you fail a course or do badly, make a D, take it over. I mean, if you really want to get in professional school, we also look at folks that withdraw from classes and go, I wonder why they withdrew. I mean, what was in their life? What was going on? So we really do try to find the make of the person. So why emergency medicine, Angela? How in the world? I mean, did you just back into it, or were you having a bad day, or you couldn't get hired as a surgeon, or why emergency? As past president of the college, why emergency medicine?
I chose emergency medicine, but I went to a program that was a 2-3-4 program. You had to do an internship first. And so it was either lie to the surgeons or do internal medicine. And so I lied to the surgeons, sorry, Dr. Peacock, and told them that I was really, really interested in surgery. And I became the first woman that they ever accepted to their surgical program. And then I had to tell them 7 months later that I was going to emergency medicine. They were not happy. They were not happy. And that's a whole other talk about what life was like for female surgical residents in the 80s. But I chose emergency medicine because when I went to medical school, we did a first aid course. And after that first aid course, you were allowed to go down to the ER and help in any way you wanted to. I don't know if Texas Tech still does that or not, but that was life-changing for me because there were no ER residents in the ER. There were rotating other specialties, but no ER residents. So Michael Wainscott, who many of you knew, was one of the faculty there. And he taught me how to suture and taught me how to start IVs and taught me how to put on splints. And by the time I got to my clinical years, I could do anything in the ER that could be done. I could relocate a shoulder. I was not allowed to intubate, but I had the pleasure of sewing up a couple of my classmates. I have some prominently displayed surgical work that you can see on a prominent plastic surgeon here in Dallas. I am responsible for that little scar on his eyebrow, which he got playing touch football. And it was great. So I'm get to my clinical years, and when I was on call and I was bored, I would go down to the ER. And I will admit, I hope none of my former faculty are watching this, but I sometimes skipped out of clinic because it was boring and went down to the ER. So one morning about 3 in the morning, I had just done a spinal tap for the peds team, and they were always happy, right? Those residents were so overworked. And they were happy to have you come down there and do any procedure for them. So I had just done a spinal tap. I was writing a note, and Mike Wainscott said, "What are you going to do with your life?" And again, it's one of those conversations that I remember. I said, "Well, I'm not sure. I hate clinic. Don't ever want to be in a clinic seeing the same people over and over again. I love the OR, but I don't want to live there. And I'm not sure what I can do." And he looked at me and said, "You can do emergency medicine. That's a thing." Life-changing moment. I said, how would you do this ER thing if you were going to do this? So he sent me to El Paso to do a rotation. And then I did an EMS rotation in El Paso, and I was hooked. It was all downhill from there.
That's a wonderful story. Mine was somewhat similar. I backed into emergency medicine and blinked my eyes, and 20 years passed, and I realized I loved what I was doing. I'm going to ask you 3 quick questions, and then we'll move on. We're at about an hour, and we have 1,300 people online just loving you, Angela. Thank you. 3 quick questions. Do I need to start building credit to obtain medical school loans?
No. So most student loans don't take into account your credit history. They will take into account your anything that if you've had a bankruptcy, for instance, they will take that into account. But they don't care if you're employed, unemployed, or the status of your schooling. They're looking at what you're trying to achieve and loaning you the money based on that. And those are guaranteed by people who are investors in the student loan programs. Now, all that being said, many student loans have requirements for financial need, and those change, they fluctuate over time. If you are not independent, so if you were in my shoes at age 20, I paid my way through college. My mother was an English teacher. My father worked at a refinery. I paid my way through college, and I had saved up some money to go to medical school. But my father claimed me on his taxes every year. So that meant they used my parents' income to determine if I needed money for school. And I fell in the gap. Luckily, Texas was not an expensive place to go to school at that time. So be aware that one of the strategic decisions you need to make before you go to medical school is whether or not you need to be independent from your parents. If you are independent, and there are different ways to prove that you're independent, then you may qualify for more loans. Your parents will take a financial hit for that because you will no longer be a deduction for them, and it may be worth more to them for you to be a deduction. And those are things that only your parents' accountants can help them with. If your parents come from modest means, as mine did, then you may be better off being independent. To do that right now, you have to prove that you are supporting yourself more than 50% of the time and more than 50% of the income. So you cannot be living at home, which is hard during COVID. And you must be providing more than 50% of your living expenses.
Did you work during college and medical school?
I did.
I know you did.
I worked in government documents in the library at A&M, and then I discovered that bartending paid a heck of a lot more than working in government documents. So I went to work at a small place that it wasn't the Dixie Chicken, but it was one of the small places that was more of a family restaurant with a bar. And I found out that at lunchtime, all the oil field hands would come in and have lunch, and they left $10, $20 tips just for lunch. And that was at a time when, their meals were about a quarter of that. Then when I was a dancer in college, in the physical education department, and that was about the time that aerobics became a big deal. So when I went to medical school, I taught aerobics for the physical education department at Texas Tech. And I taught 2 classes a day, 4 days a week, and 2 classes on Sunday. I spent 20 hours a week in my first 2 years teaching dance. So that actually helped me study, because I went to class from 8 to 5. I taught a class at 5:30, a class at 7:30. I picked up a quick dinner at 9 o'clock and studied till midnight, got up the next day and did it again. Every day for 2 years.
That's funny. At Georgia, for 2 years, I was a song and dance man at Six Flags over Georgia. And then in medical school, I worked in the laboratories, arterial blood gas. I worked in the urinalysis lab. I was the P king, as it were. So Angela, you and I both spent the first half of our practices in business and working for groups, staffing emergency departments. If you were going to run a practice in the future, would you recommend obtaining both your MD and an MBA as well?
Yes. So part of my history that I promised to share with you along the way, which you've heard a lot of now, is that when about 2 years out in practice, I was asked to come to Dallas to join a small group. And as part of that group, became a partner and took partner call and was responsible for a bottom line. And we grew that business into a large practice management group. And then we were bought by an even larger practice management group that put me to work doing risk management. So I got my MBA in the School of Hard Knocks. Unfortunately, I think that those opportunities don't exist anymore in emergency medicine. And I think that people that are looking to have some type of business or administrative responsibilities need to have some kind of advanced degree.
You've got to know something. Yeah, I borrowed a lot of money, $500,000 in 1982 to build an urgent care center. And I really couldn't run a profit, loss, revenue, and expense sheet. And in retrospect, I lost a lot of money because I just really simply had not run a business before. Angela, let's do one last question, and then we'll go to the next section, which is going to be very interesting for the students that are watching. Can you be politically active as a doctor? This was highly requested by the students today.
Yes, you can. And advocacy is a big part of medicine and should be an even bigger part. So the basic way that you can be an advocate for your profession is through belonging. And I know that's something that this generation isn't big on, but belonging to your specialty society, belonging to your county medical society, belonging to your state medical society are all important things. So just belonging and paying your dues is helpful because that money is put to good use. But becoming involved in something that you are passionate about is what will prolong your career. So I would not trade anything for all the time that I have spent advocating for my fellow physicians.
So Angela, you're going to tell us now the money physicians make, how it differs by genders, how it differs by specialties. So why don't you share that with us?
All right. So as I promised, here's the answer to the question, should I borrow money for medical school? And the answer is, it depends. And I want you to think really hard about this. Many of you are fervently pursuing a medical degree because that's something you want. And I've already challenged you to think about why you want that and how to get it. The next thing you need to think about is it possible for you to do it, and does it make sense? So here's a math problem. If you borrow $400,000 to pay for school at 6%, how much will you end up paying back after 30 years? So I picked up an amortization table, and this is the amount that it will be. Those are available online. Pick any one. $863,353. So your education will cost you close to $1 million. Is that something you're prepared to do? Is it something you want to do? And is it something that makes sense for you? Now, if you are lucky enough to have the $400,000 that you need to go to medical school, or if someone is willing to give you that $400,000, or even privately loan it to you at 0% interest, please take that. Don't be proud, just take the money, because you can see that you will end up paying back more than you borrow if you have to borrow that money. If the only way you can go to medical school is to borrow the money, then you have to make the decision about whether that's worthwhile for you or not. All right. So here's how you make that decision. Here's what doctors make from top to bottom. This is the average annual physician compensation for 2019. You can see at the top of the list here, I don't know if you can see my cursor. We talked about laser pointers earlier, but if you can see my cursor, at the top of the heap here is orthopedics, making $482,000 average a year. And you can read it down as well as I can. Plastic surgery, ENT, cardiology, derm, all over $400,000 until you get down to anesthesiology. And then here's emergency medicine, $353 annual salary, 2019. That's all comers. And then the primary cares, oops. And who's making the least? Who are those guys out there fighting COVID? Oh yeah, the public health and preventive medicine guys. Yeah, making $209,000 a year. Now you can add this up, $209,000 over, let's just say you can practice for 40 years. And I have no idea what your other financial obligations are. You have to decide if it's worthwhile for you to borrow that $1 million that you're going to have to pay back. And I'm not suggesting that you choose your specialty based on how much money that you're going to make, but just be realistic about what that is. And as promised, here's a look at, sorry, I have to move my little field of people there. So here's a look at who makes more money. Primary care men make average $258,000 a year. Primary care women make $207,000. That's $51,000 difference. Over the course of a lifetime of a career, that's $2.2 million difference in being male and female. Specialists have a similar divide, although it's greater, right? It's more than 50,000. And that ends up being a huge difference in compensation. Why is that? So now, right now, all the men that are on this call are going, yeah, well, that's because women don't work as hard, blah, 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 blah. Not true. The data shows that women actually, on average, work 38.5 hours a week, and men work 40 hours per week. Those are self-reported now, so it may not be entirely accurate, but women do work more. It's not that they're working part-time. There are some instances where women do work part-time, and that usually has to do with the situation of having babies or when the babies are very young. And it is true that that will set women back a little bit in terms of compensation, and they may never catch up to their male counterparts, but it's not $2.2 million worth of part-time. So I think we can put that by the wayside. The other thing I hear is that, well, women choose specialties that don't pay as much. And there is some truth there. So women tend to be more represented in specialties that don't make as much money. And on the right-hand side, you see a graph here that shows you what percentage of each specialty is comprised of women. So OB-GYN is at the top. 61% of practicing OB-GYNs are women. And not far behind that, pediatrics. And who were the lowest earners on that other chart? Oh yeah, pediatrics. and you can follow this down: psychiatry, pathology, dermatology. Why do you think women choose those specialties? Well, it's complex. I was just waiting for somebody to say something sexist. The answer is actually very complex. When medical students choose specialties, they often choose based on the people that they meet in those specialties, more so than any description of what the life of that specialist will be like. So there's a common perception that there are specialties that are, quote, good, unquote, for women. I actually had an allergist from Wichita Falls tell me that he was okay with me going to medical school as long as I chose a clinic-based specialty so that I could be home with my children. This was during my interview for medical school. Just saying. So there is the perception out there that some specialties are more family friendly than others. These days, I'm not sure that there are any family friendly specialties. But I do know that if you think emergency medicine is one that is great for your home life, we need to have a serious talk. When you become an emergency physician, you sign on to work days, evenings, nights, weekends, and holidays the rest of your life. You will not age out. You will not gain seniority and not have to work weekends. You are working those undesirable days the rest of your life. Now, it is true that we work in shifts and that can be compartmentalized, but what it cannot be, at least in today's world, is standardized. So very few people offer you jobs where you can say, I want to work every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 7 to 3. Most groups, you have to actually share the wealth. So I wanted to put in just a slide about race and ethnicity and income, because it's shocking when you look at it. You'll see the top earners at 319K. Sorry, I need to put my glasses on. And then the low earners at average. These are averages, and this includes all specialties that we just looked at by ethnicity. Why? And this is what always comes up. The only answer that I can come up with that makes any sense is pure prejudice. And we could talk at length about that, but it may have to do with the structure and location of practices, and that may have to do with choices that people make. But overall, I think this is about prejudice. And this is something that as physicians and as human beings that we need to take on. So what do I mean by the structure of a practice? So we've been talking this entire hour and a half about choices that you're making, choices in how you present yourself to the world, choices in the education that you make, choices in the finances that you take on, choices in your debt ratio when you get married, etc. So one of the choices that you make that will affect your ability to make money is the structure of the practice that you have. And here are some very simplified facts. Physicians who are self-employed make more than physicians who work for other people. Physicians who work for hospital systems, in other words, they're employed by hospital systems, make less than those who work for physician-led groups. Physicians who work in academia make less than people in private practice. Physicians who work for the federal government make the least of all. So those poor guys down at the CDC who are doing infectious disease and public health are in the lowest income workers of all physicians. Keep that in mind. So you have to be careful about politics, but you can bring them into your life. Where you decide to practice also impacts the income that you have. And I've listed here for you the top 10 states for earning income for physicians. And yes, Oklahoma is number 1. Why is that? I have no idea. Somebody smart will have to tell me the answer to that. Alabama's next, Nevada, Arkansas. There you go, Brandon. Florida, you can guess why Florida. It has to do with population density and age. Kentucky, Tennessee, Connecticut, Georgia, Indiana. Now, Part of your consideration of this needs to be the population demographics of those states. What do those things have in common? If you looked at a map of the United States and you looked at the unhealthiest populations out there, you would find 6 of these 10 states are in that group. They have the fattest, most hypertensive, most diabetic populations in the nation. And that may have something to do with how often they seek medical care. So that may have something to do with income. So you have choices that ultimately will affect your life. And not all of these choices are financial, but it helps for you to at least take a step back and realize what you're doing and owning. That's part of adulting, owning the decisions that you make. So step 1, you can choose who you work for. You can choose private practice, academic, government, work for yourself, hang out your own shingle, etc. 2, you can choose where you work. You can choose one of those more lucrative markets if you care to. 3, you can choose how you brand yourself. You can put those pictures of you drinking every night with a different person by your side if you want to. And that actually might get you some patients in certain parts of the country, but for most it won't. And all of that you should do with your goal of your ultimate financial state in mind. Now, not everybody wants to be rich. I don't want to be rich, never wanted to be rich. But when you start to have a hair this color, you start to think about what it would take to live to be 90, because I am likely to live to be 90, which means that if I retire at 70, I have to support myself for 20 years. Now, I also have looming in the back of my head the fact that there's a fair number of women who develop dementia in my family, and it tends to happen in the late 60s. So maybe I don't have that many years left, and maybe I retire before I'm 70. In that case, if I have medical needs and health needs, will I be able to support those? So those are my goals, to be able to live until I'm 90 without eating cat food and having a roof over my head. And frankly, living next to an airport doesn't hurt. You can choose, if you like, to be a billionaire, or you can choose to have very little but put all of your life into having experiences. It doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong about it. What's important is that you choose that goal and make the choices that will get you the goal you want. So, would I choose medicine again? Absolutely. Would I choose emergency medicine again? Absolutely. Although, if I were your age, I would think hard about IR. And the reason is interventional radiologists get to have all the fun. They get to do all the procedures and send their patients home, which used to be what we did in emergency medicine. And now, you know, it's become a much more critical care and technical field. But when we asked this question of many of my colleagues last year, some were happy. Note that infectious disease is on the top, even though they make less money than everybody else. Cardiologists would choose it again. Oncologists would choose it again. I suspect that's because they have a certain personality type or they wouldn't have chosen that. I was disappointed to learn that 25% of emergency physicians wouldn't choose emergency medicine again. And I'm really, really interested to find out why that is and what things we could change as a specialty that would make life better for those people. PM&R are the most dissatisfied, which surprises me superficially, because PM&R in my head has it made, right? I mean, they work office hours, they get paid good money. They do have to work with patients who have significant challenges, and maybe that has something to do with their happiness with life. And then plastic surgeons are surprisingly not happy. And again, I don't know why they're not happy. I'd be interested to hear the answer to that. So here's the number one interview question that people hear. It's fairly consistent, and your answer is important. What would you do if you couldn't have a career in medicine? And if your answer is, well, I've never considered anything else and it's all I want to do, let me tell you, that's not the answer people want to hear. That means that you really haven't thought about what life would be like if you weren't a doctor. And as important as medicine is, as happy as I am to be a doctor, there's a whole world outside of here, outside of medicine. There's a beach behind me on my virtual background here in honor of the hurricane that's coming. I lived on a beach for a while. I've climbed a few mountains. If I take my virtual settings off here in a minute, I will. You'll see behind me on the wall a couple of posters for novels I've written, and those things are all important to me. So would I choose medicine again? Absolutely. If I had to do something else, I'm happy to say that there is something else I could have done.
Angela, what keeps you coming back to the ER? Let me go first. It's almost the most social thing that I do. I love being a doctor. I really enjoy it. When I have a sick person who really is terrified, and I have the opportunity to go in there and sit down and hold their hand, a lot of you students have been with, or the working group have been with me. I really enjoy that. And with the nurses and the techs, you know, these become some of the best friends. I enjoy that. And plus, I really enjoy getting my brain reamed out, thinking through very difficult diagnoses. I really enjoy that. What keeps you coming back?
I like the fight. So part of my personality is to challenge. I challenge myself. I challenge other people. I know that I do it. I've managed to become socially acceptable over time. And I like the fight. When I chose emergency medicine, it was an underdog. I had the chair of that self-same surgery department tell me that I would come begging him for a surgery residency in a couple of years because I would burn out in 5 years, and that he was going to tell me no. And I stood on a stage with him about 7 years ago, and I reminded him of what he had said, and he laughed. He admitted it. He admitted that he had said that to me. And then went on to tell me how he was responsible for all the research in emergency medicine. But in spite of that, I didn't burn out. And I think there's a whole generation of people who won't burn out, because this is a challenging profession, and it's that fight that keeps me coming back.
Dr. Gardner, your residents had an affectionate title for you whenever you would advocate so strongly for us, you know, for consultants arguing with us or not wanting to come see our patient. In your redhead days, we called it a ginger snap, and we thoroughly enjoyed it, and we appreciated that fight coming from you on our behalf.
Yeah, I actually heard that a time or two.
You know, I think another piece is advocating for someone in need. As corny as that sounds, that is a perfectly good reason to have a job, is that you can take what you know, put something together, and defend the human condition. It just doesn't get better than that. And I have watched you just about throw your body in front of a door saying, this is what we're going to do. And something I've admired very deeply about you, Angela. So keep going.
Well, that's what I have. That's all I have to say. And if we have time, I'll take some more questions.
Well, we have a bunch. Do you think marriage actually improves assets, Angela, or do you think, or should people just choose to marry successful people?
I think marriage improves you in a number of ways. It teaches you to be flexible. It teaches you how to get along with people. It teaches you to be in it for the long haul. I learned that lesson the hard way. There's a lot to be said for marriage. You live longer statistically, and it will double your assets. That being said, it does require work, and you have to make good choices. And honestly, I think some of it is just luck. You have to be lucky to find somebody that is really a good partner for you, and to share the same goals and to go forward with those goals.
So how can we narrow the gap in the salaries between women and men?
I think transparency is a big part of that. And unfortunately, that's hard to find in a business environment because people don't share their salaries. But when you are able to compare salaries head to head and say, well, why do you pay this person less than that person? Many times it's because they can, and business is about making money. So why would you not do that? But bringing those things out into the open will help solve some of the problem.
Interesting. Do you think, different subject, do you think that women who decide to work part-time are actually wasting a finite resource, the finite resource being a spot in medical school and residency that could have produced a full-time physician?
Wow.
I know, I
So
thought that was a great question.
that is a great question. The faulty premise of that question is that a full-time doctor is better than a part-time doctor, or that a full-time doctor is more productive than a half-time doctor. So all night I've talked to you about the importance of choices and making those choices. For your own wellness, you need to make the choices that are right for you. If the choice that is right for you is to be a doctor half-time and a Supreme Court judge half-time, I think no one would argue that your half-time profession is being wasted. What's really at the heart of that question is a value judgment that what women do with the other half of their time is not valuable. And I challenge that premise.
How hard is it to open your own practice right out of residency?
It depends. It's harder now than it's ever been to get financing. The AMA statistics tell us that for every physician, you need 4 office workers to handle the insurance claims and claim filing for governmental entities. It takes 2 nurses and 1 front office person. So you've now added up 7 people, 7 salaries for you to support for 1 physician. And this, of course, is based in primary care. Emergency medicine is a different thing. Hospital-based practices are different things. But having to support 7 salaries, even at a minimum level, you're talking $300,000 a year. That's at a minimum level. So your practice on day 1 is going to have to support $300,000 in salaries plus whatever you owe in office space. You're going to start out $1 million in debt. And then with our current reimbursement structure, will you make $1 million? If you're an internist, the answer is no. You'll be years paying for that practice. So the answer is yes, you can do it. There are people who do, but it's difficult.
Did you make any financial mistakes along the way? Did you lose any money?
Oh, big.
Pick
big.
one.
So when I got out of residency, I bought a house. It was not a horribly expensive house, but it was probably 75th percentile for the community that I was in. And what happened? Just like everybody else, 18 months later, I'm going to another job. And this house, so when I got out of my residency, what I thought I wanted was to have 2.5 kids, a dog, go hiking in the summer and skiing in the winter, and practice in a community and live there the rest of my life. God had other plans, but that's what I thought I wanted. So 18 months later, I'm looking at a different position and moving on to a different life, and I could not sell that house. So I kept that house for 5 more years, making payments while I was living in a rental at my new place. Huge, huge mistake.
Angela, you've been the author of books, and just to let the students know, and Rachel and Reagan, we would like to get the titles of your books, and we'll post them on the website under your talk, so that the students the 1,300 students that are still with us, who might want to refer to them, could actually have the opportunity to see what you've said and so on.
As long as you
We've been
realize
going an hour.
that I write romance fiction, so I wouldn't take it all that seriously.
Do you write under the name Angela Gardner, or do you have a pseudonym?
I do not. I write under the name Kathleen Kendall.
That is hysterical. That is so funny. I do recall in medical school, I was writing for the student newspaper. I always wrote for newspapers in high school and college and at med school. The med school newspaper was appropriately named The Cadaver. And I wrote about how hard it was to meet people to date. Where do you look for it? That sort of thing. That was the old romantic in me. Angela Gardner, you are one phenomenal person. You're a wonderful doctor. If I were ever sick, you or Brandon Morchetti, I would come to you because I know I'd be safe and that I would get the just and appropriate care with due consideration for the things that make me, advocating for me as a patient and as a person. And I'm deeply grateful for that. You've made such a contribution to our specialty. You work with the admissions committee. You're an interviewer. And do you have, as an interviewer for many years, do you have any messages for these students? Because many of them will be applying soon. Any take-home messages?
Yes. Don't hire a coach. It is readily apparent when someone has been coached in their interview. Now, I'm not saying don't practice interviewing and don't practice questions and don't prepare answers, but don't hire a coach. That is obvious. And the question that enters my mind is, why did you need to do that? And the second thing is, be a human being, be yourself. Try to avoid disparaging anyone else or being negative about anyone else, but be yourself, be a human being, be the human being that you are, because that's the quality you need to bring to medicine and keep with you.
So, Angela Gardner, could you, you have 1,300 people planning to spend their careers in medicine. Let's say it's 1,000. Each one of the 1,000 will see 100,000 patients during a career. You have the opportunity now to touch over 100 million lives. Give a last parting word or two to these folks seeking a career in medicine as to what they can do to better the human condition.
So I'm going to tell you the thing that's top of my mind right now. So in my mind, the most concerning thing about our current pandemic is the separation that exists when we do this. And when we stand 6 feet from our patients, if you're having trouble understanding me, it's because of this. And after this is over, and it's possible, I think it's crucial that we go back to the bedside, that we touch our patients, that we make eye contact with them, that we spend some time talking with them, because they don't come to you because you're smart, although you are. They come to you because they're afraid. They're afraid and they're in pain. And you have the capability of changing that with your touch and your compassion. And your medical knowledge is secondary. So keep that with you always.
Click on the next slide, would you? We've got to give them the heads up on the exam. Let's go to the next one, Angela, please. That's it.
Can I say a few things on this first?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the quiz is not open right now. It will open once the session is completely over. Give us a few minutes to go onto QuestBase and open it. And you will have 2 attempts. It's not timed. The pin is right there. You have to use the dashes, and you'll want to insert the pin into that Find Assessment tab. And the password is all lowercase choices. So until the quiz opens, it's going to say that password is incorrect. So we will open it shortly after the session is over.
Let's ask everybody online, all 1,200 of you still remaining, to send a good thank you on the chat to Dr. Gardner. Angela Gardner, physician, humanitarian, leader in your specialty, academician, raising these young residents. We've had 500 now come and go, and as these thank yous were pouring into the chat, thank you so much for taking the time tonight to be with us. God bless you. And as these thank yous pour in, we just want you to know you've made a very important contribution to medicine. So thank you, Angela.
Oh, thank you. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thank you. please pay attention to the website. It may be possible we may be looking for some volunteers to help out with the incoming hurricane. I'll post it on the website. And we just want to thank you for being here. As long as you keep coming back, we're going to be here. So this will conclude our 13th session. Thank you, everyone. Godspeed. Have a great evening, and we wish you a good night. Thank you.